The city's elite were mixing, the dance floor was packed, the strobe lights were cutting through the crowd, and the energy was at an all-time high when Kirk Frost and Young Jock entered the scene. It wasn't just a party, though. They had a serious agenda, and their target, Lil Scrappy, a man whose magnetic presence could light up any room, was the beginning of it. This wasn't just a heated exchange. It was a full-fledged face-off that had the entire club on edge. However, what drove Kirk and Jock to confront Scrappy so boldly, and how far did it go before security had to step in? The night had only just begun, but the center of the dance floor was suddenly transformed into a battleground as the icy stares, hushed words, and brewing storm beneath the surface all changed in an instant. This was the place to be if you had status. The dance floor was pulsing with life, with strobe lights flickering and syncing with the pounding bass, giving glimpses of faces lost in the music at the bar groups huddled over cocktails, yelling to be heard over the deafening noise. The nightclub was already electric, with booming music, flashing lights, and a crowd that kept growing wilder. The line outside stretched around the block. Beat everyone. You looked at them, and they were in their zone, but up in the VIP area, things were different. The atmosphere wasn't about celebrating, but rather about something brewing beneath the surface. Kirk Frost and Young Jock were sitting in their private booth with entourages buzzing around them. They looked the part, with expensive liquor and a designer fit, but something wasn't quite right. Kirk's smile didn't quite reach his eyes, and Jock's laughter felt forced, and there was tension between them that most people couldn't see but couldn't ignore those around them. They were too preoccupied with the benefits of being in the orbit of two big names in another VIP booth across the room. Lil Scrappy was the life of his own party, where Kirk and Jockey were locked in thought. Scrappy was pure energy. His laughter cut through the music. His movements were effortless. His charisma was undeniable. He wasn't just there. He owned the space. People gravitated toward him. Glasses clinked. And every few minutes someone came by to pay their respects. Kind of guy who transformed a routine night into a memorable one, and tonight was no exception. But beneath the surface, things were changing. Kirk and Jack kept looking towards Scrappy's booth, slowly at first, with a glance here and a whispered exchange there. But as the minutes went by, it became evident that Kirk leaned in and spoke in a low but urgent voice. Jock's expression darkened whatever they were discussing, and the atmosphere around them changed. A waitress bringing drinks hesitated, sensing the change, her eyes flickering between Kirk's clenched jaw and Jock's narrowed gaze before proceeding swiftly. Meanwhile, at Scrappy's table, the atmosphere remained electric and unfazed. He stopped to greet a few familiar faces, lifting his glass in acknowledgement. If he felt the weight of their stares, he didn't show it. Jock watched him, and his jaw tightened. He leaned closer to Kirk, saying, "You see what I'm seeing over the pounding bass." Kirk didn't immediately respond, but his eyes were fixed on Scrappy's every move, and at last he nodded. Voice measured, "I see it." There was a history here that most people in the club didn't know about. The three men had been friends for years, attending the same events and hanging out in the same circles. On the surface, their interactions seemed cordial, but there were layers to Scrappy's rise. His unbridled confidence and his increasing influence had made him a favorite of many, but not of everyone. For Kirk and Jockey, it wasn't just about him, it was about what he stood for, his unwavering confidence, and his capacity to attract attention. He made a statement with his movements as if nothing could touch him, and for some, that statement wasn't welcome. The DJ changed tracks. The dance floor erupted, the lights flashed faster, bodies moved tighter, and the club's energy peaked at that point. Kirk and Jock got up, and without saying a word, they started pushing through the crowd, cutting directly to Scrappy, who was engrossed in the moment. He nodded to fans calling his name, raised his glass, and kept the energy going. But the people around him, they sensed it coming. The atmosphere changed, and then all of a sudden, everything changed. By the time Scrappy looked up, it was too late. Kirk had stopped a few feet away, so he had his hands in his pockets. The music, the flashlights, The faraway laughter and the tension-filled silence all faded into the background, and Scrappy lowered his drink a little, his usual smile dimming, and straightened his posture as he assessed them. "What's going on, guys?" he asked in a casual but cautious tone, and his crew became agitated. A few of them stood up, their eyes darting between Kirk and the jock. No one spoke, but the tension in the room was evident to everyone, even the onlookers. Kirk didn't respond right away. Instead, he studied Scrappy, his expression unreadable, and then he said, "You've been running your mouth," raising an eyebrow. But the usual assurance in his voice faltered. "I'm not sure what you mean." He said that his words were firm, but something in his posture betrayed him. His eyes flicked toward his booth, where his crew was now fully alert. They whispered to each other, but no one moved. Scrappy knew that this was his battle, and he continued, turning back to them. "If you have anything to say, say it," he said. His body language was calm and controlled, but his eyes told a different story. His tone edged into defiance, and his free hand curled into a fist at his side. He took a step forward, standing almost toe-to-toe with the jock. The crowd around them shifted, with some stepping back and others leaning in, drawn in by the anticipation of an explosion. At that moment, the nightclub wasn't about the music, the drinks, or the party. It was about that space where Kirk was. "If you're smart, you'll listen." Scrappy didn't flinch. If anything, his stance became firmer. Everyone could sense what was about to happen, but Jack spoke first. He pointed a finger at Scrappy, saying, "You know what this is about." He said, "You've been talking out of your long-spreading lies. You think you can run your mouth and not face the consequences." Frost, young Jock, and Lil Scrappy stood in a completely different battlefield nearby. Scrappy's crew was tense, some standing, some hovering near the booth, their eyes darting between the three men. Their whispers were quick and urgent. With a quick swipe, he unlocked his phone and held up the screen. The glare of the device reflected off Scrappy's face, prompting him to squint in an attempt to make out the details. But he didn't need to see it because the weight of Kirk's move said everything. Scrappy lifted his chin, Jack tightened, and said, "If I have something to say, I'll say it." Kirk responded, "But don't come at me with weak accusations unless you have something solid." The man's jaw tightened, so he said, "You're going to show me some out-of-context messages. That's your proof." He snorted and waved a dismissive hand, but his voice wasn't as steady as before. His bravado was still there, but his stance had changed slightly, Lily. This is the kind of subtle shift that only occurs when someone begins to feel the walls closing in. Jock took another step and is now standing shoulder to shoulder with Kirk. This isn't out of context, though. He leaned in and said, "You've been playing both sides, saying one thing to us and another to everyone else." Scrappy's anger boiled over, and he planted his feet, squared his shoulders, and locked eyes with the two men. "You think you can come in here and press me?" he said, his voice cutting through the noise louder. "Now who do you think you are?" he asked, with heads turned from nearby tables. Conversations hushed. The nightclub's pulse continued to thump. The bass continued to thump, the lights flashing, but in this pocket of space, all focus. The words landed hard, and Scrappy took a slow, deep breath, his fists clenching at his sides, his shoulders stiff. On the other side of him, a small group of people gathered at the edges, drawn in by the fire burning between them. Kirk didn't blink, and his voice was measured and controlled, but underneath, there was steel. "This is bigger than you think." He leaned in just a little. "If you keep running your mouth, it will hurt not just you, but everyone around you." Voice low, simmering, "Say it now because I'm done playing games." Behind him, his crew tightened their formation, stepping in closer. They didn't say anything, but their presence was enough, and a loose semicircle formed behind him, forming a wall of quiet support. The jock smirked and shook his head, saying, "You already said too much." He added, "We're just here to make sure you know we're not letting it slide." Suddenly, Kirk stepped forward, close enough for Scrappy to feel the heat of his breath. His voice was almost lost under the music, but still sharp enough to cut through the tension. Kirk whispered, "Keep talking and you'll see what happens next." Scrappy didn't move or blink, but his voice was firm. "You don't scare me," he said, "but you never did." The energy in the room changed once more, and Jock's fists tightened. Kirk's eyes narrowed, and Scrappy's crew edged closer, their muscles coiled for whatever was about to happen. The crowd barely breathed, seconds away from erupting, and then a firm hand fell on Kirk's shoulder. The security guard's voice was calm but authoritative, and he said, "Take it outside or take a seat." Kirk didn't move at first, his eyes still fixed on Scrappy, his expression unflinching. The jock took a step back, rolling his shoulders, but his posture remained tense. Scrappy exhaled slowly, loosening his stance, but the fire in his eyes never went out. The security guard wasn't playing, so he gestured toward their booths. "I don't care who you are," he said, sounding like stone. "This isn't the place for that." Scrappy didn't move immediately. His breath was still a little heavy, and his hands were still tingling from the rush. Then, Kirk slid his phone back into his pocket and said, "We'll settle this another time." His voice was low enough for Scrappy to hear, and Jack gave him one last look before turning away. They walked back toward their VIP section, disappearing into the crowd. "Screw you, good man," Scrappy blinked, forcing himself to ease back into the moment. "I'm good." He picked up his drink, took a slow sip, and turned toward his booth. His voice was calm and steady, but there was a hint of tension beneath it. They were all talking, and he let the words settle, but as he sat down, that feeling in his stomach wouldn't go away. This wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. As the night wore on, the tension didn't go away. Rather, it thickened and settled into. Kirk and Jock were back in their booth, but the atmosphere had changed. Their drinks were still there, and they were not talking to each other. Instead, they were watching and waiting to decide what to do next. On the other side of the club, Scrappy tried his best to shake it off, leaning back in his booth with a smirk on his lips, but his closest friends and family caught a glimpse of him, keeping their conversations quiet and glancing at Kirk and Jock. In record time, people whispered about what they had witnessed, embellishing every detail like storytellers spinning a legend. One woman near the bar was leaning close to her friends, her voice hushed but urgent, and I swear Kirk and Juke were about to set it off with this close to swinging. At the same time, a man at the other end of the club smirked as he told his version of events. Every few minutes, the entire club seemed to fall apart like a storm hanging just overhead waiting to break. They didn't want any, and Scrappy put them down like a champion. It didn't matter that no fists had been thrown, but the rumors took over. Then the phones came out, and a shaky video appeared on social media. It was only a few seconds of footage taken from across the room, and it didn't show much. Just Kirk and the jock standing in front of Scrappy. The weight of the moment was heavy, but that was enough that within minutes, a hashtag trended. The club staff tried their best to keep the evening going, but they knew this wasn't just. Back in VIP, Kirk checked his phone. His jaw clenched as he scrolled through the barrage of comments, saying, "We're the bad guys." His voice was tight and low controlled with frustration, like we started this doc. He looked at the screen and shook his head, saying, "It's just noise." But after a moment, maybe it's time to clarify things. Kirk nodded, but his eyes didn't soften. As this was going on, Scrappy's crew was watching the same firestorm play out on their screens. One of his boys turned his phone toward him and smiled, saying, "You're a legend, man. We're calling you the king of the club." Scrappy gave a brief laugh, but it was without humor, his fingers tapping his glass and his eyes darting toward Kirk and Jock's booth. "Yeah," he muttered. He said, "but we both knew they weren't finished." He took a slow sip of his drink without taking a break in his stare. He put the glass down and sat there planning. He said, "You think this is over?" and shook his head. "No, they're just getting started." As the club closed, the energy outside was just as intense as it had been inside, with people lingering in the parking lot, still buzzing and exchanging stories, speculating that what had begun as a confrontation had turned into a full-blown saga. This wasn't just a night out anymore. It was a moment, a story that had the entire city talking. Kirk and Juke didn't need to touch another drink. The air between them was heavy with unspoken plans, so Kirk looked toward the exit and said, "Let's go." With no hesitation, the jock followed, not looking back, and with no words exchanged, he made a silent promise that this wasn't the end. Across the room, Scrappy watched them go, his jaw clenched, thinking that they were simply going to leave and come at me another day. His voice was low, almost to himself, and one of his boys leaned in whispering, but Scrappy shook his head, keeping his eyes fixed on the door. "This isn't over. Outside, the night air was," he replied. "It was cool." But there was still a lot of tension. A crowd had gathered around the valet, and people were scrolling through their phones, arguing, and moving through them silently. Their presence divided the crowd like a ripple in water, and they got into their cars and shut them quietly. The glow from their phones lit up the inside as they scrolled through the online storm. Some people were praising Scrappy, while others were urging Kirk and Jock to drop more receipts. Kirk's expression darkened. "You know what we need to do," Kirk said. He looked over, his face unreadable, but he nodded, knowing that they didn't need to explain the club drama because the real fight was about to happen. At this point, tensions are boiling, alliances are cracking, and a storm is brewing behind the scenes. Now, the real question is, what do you think happened in that club? Is Kirk and Jock's side of the story true? Or is Scrappy just the latest victim of some power play going on behind the scenes? Tell us in the comments, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. Activate notifications because this is not yet finished.